I mean, if in Spain you would have millions of unemployed people for another lost decade or something, and I think the Eurozone will be dead as a political project because the people will not be happy with it. Again, coming back to John Maynard Keynes, the important thing is that people are participating in society and have their share. That's the important thing. That is what's basically destroying societies. This kind of fascism that we see rising, it's not the result of inflation or of basically socialization of investment or people depending on welfare or stuff like this. No, it's just people are not happy with the unemployment situation. And they, in Hungary, for example, there was lots of debt also, housing-related debt. So it's these things that are driving also the political dimension of this. So for the Eurozone not to break apart, it's very important now that we keep unemployment down, not like in the last crisis. After the great financial crisis, it was completely horrible. And if we repeat this again, there will be more countries going out of the European Union, for sure.
This is the MMT Podcast with Patricia and Christian Riley. Hi, I'm Christian Riley and welcome to the Modern Monetary Theory Podcast. You can find us on Twitter at MMT Podcast and you can support the show by going to patreon.com/MMT Podcast. For as little as $1 a month, you can get early access to all our episodes and patron-only episodes. A big thank you to all our supporters so far. At the beginning there, you heard our guest this week, Doctor of Economics and Social Science, Dr. Dirk Ehnts. And we'll be talking to him in a moment about the challenges that Eurozone member nations have faced ever since the launch of the euro. And also we're going to be talking about a policy solution being proposed by Dr. Ehnts and other MMT economists. I think MMT helps to change our public policy discourse in two ways. One is to have everyone understand what money is, where it comes from, and why we have it. And the second is to say, given this is the what, where, and why of money as a system, here's a rational way to manage that system. So what is money? One way to say it is that a national currency is a system of tax credits. So here in the UK, a £5 note guarantees you to nothing more or less than £5 off your tax obligation to the UK government. But also, because it's a tax credit and everybody needs to pay taxes sooner or later, it could be swapped for anything else you can put a £5 price tag on in our economy. And that's how pounds are our national currency rather than gold or Bitcoin or seashells. Where does the national currency come from? Well, it's issued, just like any other token, by an issuer. Intermediaries may be involved, but in the first instance, just like Beyonce issues her concert tickets or an insurance company issues its insurance policies, the UK central government issues pounds, and the issuer of a thing cannot run out of that thing by definition. When a monetarily sovereign government spends, it passes a budget through Parliament or Congress, and when the spending's approved, it instructs its central bank to credit the bank accounts of the recipients of the new spending using computer keystrokes. It's important to know that while the central bank may have independence to set interest rates, it's still part of the government. As the founder of MMT, Warren Mosler, says, government checks don't bounce. It's not the job of the central bank to decide which government payments it's going to clear. Saying the central bank or commercial banks in general create all the money is like saying Ticketmaster create all the Beyonce tickets. It's got a ring of truth, but you have to realize you're starting the money story part of the way through, and it doesn't help you to be clear about the prime mover when it comes to who issues your national currency, which is an important question, as we'll hear. So why do nations have a money system? Because the government needs to provision itself, so it runs a money system where it creates people needing to find paid work by imposing a tax on everybody payable in a thing that it alone is allowed to issue, precisely so it can spend currency into existence to hire people and buy things in order to provision itself. You don't get public goods and services like, say, a national health service without a modern money system. And the order of operations is this. The state's desire to provision itself for public purpose comes first. the government presenting people with tax bills payable in a currency that only the government is allowed to issue comes second. People looking for paid work in the state's unit of account, otherwise known as unemployment, comes third. Spending pounds into existence to hire the unemployed comes fourth. Taxes being returned back to the government comes fifth. But this is where many people think the money story starts. They think that taxpayers pay money to the government first, but what never gets examined is where those taxpayers got that money in the first place. Even though it's got a picture of a dead president or a monarch on it, and it's evident that some process other than nature created it, some people still think money is a chicken and egg story that we'll never get to the bottom of. Well, like it or not, democratic or otherwise, the government isn't using private sector issued currency. We're all using government issued currency. That's what fiat currency is. That means the government has to spend its currency first before it can tax. Otherwise, how would anybody get the money they need to pay the taxes? I think the reason we might be resistant to hearing this sequence of events laid out in this order is because our lived experience is that we come into the money story in the middle of it. Our first experience of money is that we get it from another person. It could be pocket money from our parents, and then later on we get wages from an employer or a customer base. And so we think this is where the money story begins, with the acquiring of money. So when we pay money to the government, we think we're doing what our parents did for us or what our customers do for us. We think we're giving the government some of our money to spend, whereas in actual fact, we're just returning to the government a thing that was issued by them in the first place. Getting the sequence of events in the right order is crucial to understanding the tragic epilogue of the money story, which is that after the government's done all of its spending and the private sector has done all of its spending, the residual unemployment that exists is there because the government hasn't hired everybody unemployed with its tax at the beginning of the story. And if you've ever come across the widely held mainstream economic idea that there is a natural rate of unemployment, you'll know that the government do this deliberately. They experiment with just how many people to keep unemployed in order to control inflation. And the poverty, suffering, and death that go along with it is considered a price worth paying. So given that's what money is and where it comes from and the reason why we have a money system, what's a rational way to run it? The good news is that the MMT policy prescription for eliminating poverty and putting a floor under our minimum standard of living is also the primary tool for controlling inflation, which is the job guarantee scheme, where the government, the issuer of the currency, guarantees a job to anyone willing and able to work, paid at a socially inclusive wage. And we'll be talking to Dirk about this in the Eurozone context. But if this is your first time hearing about the MMT job guarantee, I just want to point out it's not designed to replace other benefits or basic income schemes that assist people who can't or shouldn't work. And to understand more about the job guarantee, on top of this conversation, you can listen to our episode 4 with Dr. Fidel Kaboub and our episode 47 with Professor Pavlina Chernova, who also happens to be one of the co-authors of the paper under discussion, and we've linked to that paper in the show notes. It's called Completing the Euro Treasury and the Job Guarantee. As you'll hear, at the heart of the challenge for nations that adopted the euro is the fact that they adopted a foreign currency that they do not control the issuance of, and that has severely limited the policy options for many nations attempting to solve the acute economic problems in the Eurozone right now, which makes this policy proposal so urgent. Also in the show notes, there are links to information about the summer and winter schools that Dirk will be teaching this year online in MMT and European macroeconomics. The courses look excellent. They take place over a week. The deadline for enrollment in the summer school is 1st of July 2020, and the course starts on July the 20th. Finally, as ever, a big thank you to you guys for listening and recommending us to other people. And a special thank you to our patrons for your support, which really helps keep the show going. If If you're not yet a patron, you can become one by going to patreon.com/MMT podcast. There's a link in the show notes. Support starts at $1 a month, which is 89 euro cents at the time of recording. Thanks again for listening. Let's dive in. Welcome one and all to the MMT podcast. I'm Christian Riley. I'm here with my co-host, the wonderful Patricia Pino. How are you doing, Patricia?
Hi, not too bad. How are you?
I'm good, coping. But we are delighted to welcome for the first time economist and author, Doctor of Economics and Social Science, Dr. Dirk Ehnts. Hi, Dirk. How are you?
Hi, Christian. Hi, Patricia. Thanks for having me.
It's our absolute pleasure. And because it's your first time with us, can you tell our listeners how you first came to MMT?
Yeah, that was about 10 years ago. So I did my PhD in neoclassical economics, basically looking at economic geography, what was back then called new economic geography, because it was invented by Paul Krugman, and you had these questions of where does industrial activity locate in space, and you had a core and periphery patterns, these kind of things, agglomerations, you had vertical and horizontal spillovers, these kind of things, and for some reason there was no money in those models. So I thought that's a bit odd. So in reality, the current account or the trade account is not balanced. We have imbalances. We had them in the global economy with China exporting a lot, Germany exporting a lot, other countries importing a lot, mostly the United States. Also in the Eurozone, we had Greece, we had Spain, I think probably also Ireland, depending on what you looked at exactly. So I thought, so how does money work? How is it possible that a nation can basically consume more than it produces because you need to pay with money? So I started looking for answers, and some people told me, well, look at those Keynesian guys, and I looked at Axel Leijonhufvud, the old Swedish economist from UCLA, who had a couple of things to say about debt structures and networks, and if one payment fails, other payments fail down the line. And then I found Randy Wray online. I found his primer. I think he started that a little bit after I found him. So that was published in 2012, but I think it was put online before probably 2011, I guess. And I read it and I thought, well, if this is correct, then everything that I learned in macroeconomics so far is wrong. So he was telling us that if government spending increases, the interest rate on the money market will go down and not up. And that basically more government spending increases the amount of savings available in the economy, not reduces them. So it was outrageous. It took me a couple of months to figure it out. I was all alone, basically. I was at a small German university called Oldenburg. My colleagues were not into macroeconomics. They listened politely, but they said, okay, this is above our heads. We can't help you with it. You have to figure it out on your own. In the end, I met all these people, Randy and Stephanie and so on. I met them at the Berlin conference of the Union's Macroeconomic Institute in Germany. They have this conference in Berlin in October. And I think I met them there in 2011 or 12 already. So this is how I connected. And I asked a couple of questions. And in the end, I thought, okay, that's a good theory. I like it.
There was a lot in there, and I think it's worth maybe defining for people that may not know what is a current account. Is it it's related to imports, exports, or does it encompass far more than that?
Well, the trade account is just exports and imports of stuff, basically. It can include services like financial services, which is important for the United Kingdom. But in normal models that we do in economics, in the neoclassical style, we are basically looking at barter. Okay, so you export something, and then you have to think about it like this. You have a ship which goes to Germany, you pick up a Mercedes-Benz, and you bring something from Britain. Okay, I don't know, marmalade or something. So if this is how international trade works, you cannot have trade account imbalances, because every time you export something, you get something in return. Otherwise, it would be robbery. Okay, but the reality is, of course, it's completely different. We all buy stuff with money. So if you come to Berlin, you can buy stuff with money. Okay, so you don't have to bring something actually from Britain and try to sell it here before you can get something in return, like doner kebab, the Berlin style, or a currywurst, or some kind of other sausage of the German kind. No, we're all using money. And then, of course, we make payments with money. And that means, of course, it's perfectly possible that basically British people buy more from Germans than German people buy from British people over a year. And then you might have basically the trade account, which is then imbalanced, showing that basically one country exported more stuff to the other country than the other one. And that's basically what the models are not looking at. it's impossible to look at it because of the way the models are set up with this barter idea that you're sending ships back and forth and you're bartering. And that, of course, meant that your models are pretty much useless, especially when it comes to trade. So if you want to prove that, for example, that free trade, so basically trade without tariffs, let's simplify it a bit. If you think that this is a good idea, and your model tells you that it's only possible to prove that it is beneficial for both countries if the current account or trade account is zero. So basically, only if exports are equal to imports, you can prove mathematically that you have higher welfare. But that condition is never fulfilled in the real world. So I was not really aware of this heterodox economic stuff at all, but I just found out that after I did my PhD, the model it was not very helpful. So I basically said, I spent 4 years developing my model and developing my ideas, and I find out that in reality, it's not really working out. So I thought, okay, let's go somewhere else. Let's try to understand why. Why doesn't this make any sense? And then I came to discover this modern monetary theory. It was modern money theory to be correct, but by now both terms are in use. That's how I got there, basically.
Yeah. And so just to put fine points on it, current account and trade account are interchangeable terms that we just heard, and they mean the same thing. Am I correct?
Almost. In the current account, you have also profits, for example. So profits from multinational companies which go back to Germany. Those that are like BMW, UK will send profits back to Germany, and this is also booked in the current account, but not in the trade account. Also primary income. So Germans working in London sending money back home to support their families. And that's also in the current account. So basically current account is trade account plus some transfers of income, profits, and also contributions to international organizations like the IMF, United Nations, European Union, if you're in.
So it's practically all money transactions between two different nations, right?
Yeah.
And again, just to drill into it a bit further, let's say the German worker working in London sending money home. What's really happening is that German worker is earning pounds and then buying euro with those pounds.
Yeah.
That's what happens when the money comes home, so to speak. So in a way, the pounds stay where they always were, which was on the central bank's balance sheet of Britain, and the euros stay where they were. The ownership of those two currencies got swapped.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Let's make it very simple. So there's banks which are active in Germany and in the UK. So if you move the money from a British bank account to a German one, then basically the bank is removing your pound deposits. It's just removing them, and it's giving you inside Germany euro deposits. Just as a matter of accounting, they still have the pounds in reserves, if they have them. When you got your income basically to your account, the UK bank basically has received reserves in UK pounds. They keep those, and then they do whatever they think they should do with that. Maybe they try to sell them for dollars or for some other foreign exchange, or they use it to repay loans to the Bank of England, or they repay loans to other banks with that kind of money. So yeah, but you're right. The money on the central bank account, that never leaves the respective country. That will always stay in Britain.
Great. So let's get right into it then. What is the problem with the structure of the euro as a currency when you see it through the MMT lens? And maybe you want to describe your take on what the MMT lens is to set that up.
Yeah. Okay, so I wrote a book about this in 2014, first in German. I have a third edition now in Germany. I have to prepare the fourth now, so there's a lot of interest now. There's also an English book. It's published by Routledge called Modern Monetary Theory and European Macroeconomics. So the short story is we have a lack of government spending. Okay, so we had that all of the time. So the Eurozone setup is too restrictive when it comes to fiscal policy. So in terms of macroeconomics, it's very easy. You have I'm now referring to John Maynard Keynes. Keynes basically said there's private spending, there's public spending in a closed economy. Okay, so if private spending is not enough to employ everybody, well, then there's a shortage of jobs. And that means there will be unemployment. Okay, so whatever people do, there will be workers who want to work and they're not employed. And if they find a job, then probably somebody else will be out of a job. So you need public spending to add up to this private spending so that you can move towards full employment. And John Maynard Keynes basically said this will not happen on its own. So he said basically there's magneto trouble. He said that's what we had, magneto trouble. So the economy does not recognize by itself that there's a lack of jobs and somehow then creates more jobs. So you need to have government intervention to reach full employment. And that means that in modern states, you have to have a significant amount of government spending. And in the Eurozone, you had these deficit limits. Okay, so normal countries don't have that. So let me explain that. In the Stability and Growth Pact, which was signed in the beautiful city of Maastricht in the Netherlands, they had deficit limits in the sense that if government spends something and then they take in less in taxes, and that deficit would be more than 3% of GDP, then basically it would be considered an excessive deficit in Brussels and you would be punished. Okay, so basically the European Commission would force austerity on you. It would basically tell you to basically restrict your government spending. Why do we have that in the Eurozone? Well, it's kind of logical. If we would basically say we share one currency and every government can spend as much as they want, then all the governments would find it beneficial to spend more. Okay, so if you are Italy or Spain, why not try to spend money and hire, for example, German car manufacturers to work in Seat and in Fiat to improve the quality of your cars? Why not just use government money for that? Okay, so just like probably in the United Kingdom, you probably have some kind of balanced budget thing when it comes to the regions. Just like in the US, for example, when it comes to the US states, they also have these balanced budgets, which are forced on them. If you don't have that, then of course, again, the countries will just spend, and there would be no stopping because they could try to get all the resources from the other countries. So because the euro is such a funny kind of thing that you have one currency and many governments, and the governments are kind of competing, you need some kind of restriction of government spending. But the 3% limit of deficit, that was basically arrived at by taking just the historical average of government deficits. And that was too restrictive. And many economists understood this by the time that we thought about the euro. So in the early 1990s, you had Wynne Godley, for example, from the left, criticizing the euro. There was this nice article in the London Review of Books from 1991 or 2, Maastricht and all that. And basically he said, well, what can you do in the Eurozone if your economy goes down the drain? You have no control over the interest rate. So the central bank is not yours. You cannot determine what to do there. Fiscal policy is out of the question because you have this 3% deficit limit. So if you increase government spending, at some point you will hit that limit and then they will cut you down again. And you cannot depreciate your currency either because there's no more exchange rate. Okay, so that was Wynne Godley and Sir Alan Walters, the Thatcher economist, consultant to Margaret Thatcher. He said basically the same thing. And so did Swedish economists, also of all political stripes. And that's why the UK and Sweden, which have the oldest central banks in Europe, both stayed out of the euro because they basically said the economic adjustment mechanism will not work. The Americans agreed. So again, Paul Krugman said there will be a problem. The economic advisor to Ronald Reagan, forgot his name, he also agreed that the euro was not a good idea because there was no possibility to have economic adjustment in case of a negative shock. Yeah, that was basically the problem from the start. So we kind of knew that the euro would be a deflationary system because every time something went wrong, you would impose a cut of government spending. And of course, if you just cut over time and you never expand government spending as a solution to a problem, then of course you will have a deflationary bias. And it was very clear in the last 10 years that the ECB did not hit its inflation target because government spending was just too low. And that, of course, is completely compatible with the MMT ideas, basically saying that one of the main drivers of inflation is the fiscal side. Okay, so if you have government spending on too low a level, the ECB can do whatever it takes, but you will not reach the 2% of inflation rate or a little bit less that you envision that you should have as a target. That is basically what I describe in my book, and I think that's been more or less also the MMT story. So people like Randall Wray and also Jörg Bieber from the US, they wrote about these things also at length. So yeah, that was basically an MMT agreement on the euro.
So you can see it makes intuitive sense to go, oh, we have one market, let's have one currency. But really, we know now, and obviously the people that you just mentioned knew going in, no, that's not how currency works. You need one government, one currency, or one polity, one currency. Otherwise, you're going to get either you don't have a thing like the Maastricht limits, which then creates this moral hazard. The person that deficit spends the most wins, or it goes the way that it's gone, with the Maastricht limits, which, as you say, is the deflationary bias.
You wrote a really interesting paper with Pavlina and Steven and about a job guarantee for the Eurozone. And is that a kind of a way of trying to fix or the structure of the Eurozone, or maybe set some kind of a basic level of play for all the Eurozone countries? And how do you achieve that? Because obviously, if you set a job guarantee in the Eurozone, do you set it all at the same income level, like the wages? Would you just make them all the same, or would you make them dependent on the price of living of each country? How do you go about those problems?
Yeah, that's really the connection to what Christian just said. So the problem is that there's a lack of government spending, and then you need some kind of federal mechanism, which is basically creating aggregate demand so that they reach full employment. So we have in the Eurozone different governments of different size. Okay, so that's a bit odd, but of course the public sector in Germany, for example, is relatively big, probably also in Finland, which also has a euro. In other countries like Spain, maybe the government sector is a little bit smaller. And also in some other countries, it's smaller. So depending on how much these governments spend in aggregate, we will have probably a lack of government spending in the Eurozone of some certain amount. Okay, so maybe 100 billion or 200 billion, but you need to inject some more money. You need to spend some more money. And now the question is, of course, how do we do this? Okay, so we know that there's lots of unemployment in the Eurozone, but which kind of institution is spending the money and how? So one very easy solution, and this is the paper with Pavlina and Esteban, one very easy solution is basically to say, okay, we do the following thing. We create something which is called the Euro Treasury. Okay, so they issue government bonds called Euro bonds, and the ECB says, oh, nice ones, we'll just buy them all up. Okay, or we promise to do that. So they are risk-free assets. And they are allowed to do this because the Euro Treasury is not part of the European Union. So we just do it like the Euro Group. So it's probably based in Luxembourg or something. It's a bit of a political tweak to get around this idea of the Euro Treaty that the ECB is not supposed to finance any Eurozone government or any European Union government. But you can have a Euro Treasury which is somewhere in Luxembourg. Okay, and then you can basically let the ECB create money. So either you are selling the Euro bonds directly to the ECB, but probably that doesn't work because of legal concerns. But then you can go through the banking system. So banks borrow from the ECB, buy Euro bonds. And when the government spends, the money goes back to the banks and they repay their loans to the ECB. And the Euro bonds are out there. So that is basically something where you can access money. Okay, so there's no problem at all. The Euro Treasury could create whatever money is needed for whatever you want to do. And then our policy then, of course, is a job guarantee. So the idea is that you basically promise to employ everybody who wants to work and cannot find work. You say, we'll give you some job offers. It's all financed by Brussels, but it's administrated at the local level, not even at the national level, but at the local level. So you have some kind of job database in your city or in your village. And there's lots of jobs, hopefully maybe 3 or 4 per candidate. And then these people can just pick any kind of job, and then they get the job guarantee job. And of course, it's a bit complicated because we have different wages in the Eurozone. So probably €5 an hour would be a nice wage in Bulgaria. But if you work at McDonald's in Copenhagen, in Denmark, I think you earn something like €23. Okay, so we basically propose that we adjust the wages according to the country's price level, so that in countries where you have higher wages, higher price levels, the people earn more money. And in countries where you have lower wages, lower price level, you basically collect less money. And then we basically also use the same restrictions that we have already in place. So, for example, a person who is unemployed in Spain could not move to Germany and collect unemployment insurance right away. That's not possible. So these kind of rules regarding intra-European immigration, we basically apply the same rules that we have. So we don't want to complicate things. If you don't do this, you get into a problem, because then if for example, Denmark is not part of the Eurozone, but if Finland, for example, pays €25, let's say, per hour of job guarantee wage, then of course probably millions of Europeans will move to Finland in order to get those job guarantee jobs. And that's not what we want. So we don't want everybody to move to Finland. I mean, probably they would be happy to see more people in their country, but I don't think that this is the way to distribute economic activity in space by putting them all to Finland. So yeah, we have to be a bit careful. So we don't want to pull people out of existing communities. We want to strengthen local communities, the ones that exist. And again, we don't want to have this kind of migration because people are starving at home. Okay, so the job guarantee wage should be a decent living wage wherever you collect it. So the purchasing power should be roughly the same everywhere, even though the nominal amount of euros differs over the Eurozone. So that's basically the main idea.
Yeah. In the paper, you say the job guarantee should pay at base above poverty pay. Professor Bill Mitchell often uses the term socially inclusive wage, which I like. I use that all the time. So instead of talking about nominal euro in terms of an hourly rate, could you give us an idea of what kind of life a job guarantee worker would be able to afford under the scheme? That might be a better way to, because that shouldn't differ between Eurozone members.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, it's probably more or less built or based on the German idea of the welfare state, so that you have basically a pension, that you have access to healthcare, that you have public education for free, that you have these kind of payments or this insurance against being sick when you're old. And of course, you should be able to have a family and support your family. And then you should be able to consume roughly to participate in social life and these kind of things. But I think the most important part is that you're free from fear, basically. So there was this talk about the four freedoms, for example, by FDR, and the idea that basically you have basic rights. Okay, so what the job guarantee should do is it should basically help to make sure that those basic rights, these human rights that we have in our European constitution, well, it's not a constitution, but it's something like the Declaration of Human Rights for Europeans, a charter, that basically it helps towards achieving these goals that are written down on paper. Because we have a right to work in this kind of European Charter of Fundamental Rights. It's in there, but the job guarantee is basically the tool, the political instrument to achieve that goal. And of course, then you need to make sure, but that's basically a bit of fine-tuning. So you need to make sure that your wage is not too high, because otherwise you get too many people pulled out of the private sector and the public sector as well. So we need people to work also in the public sector, but that's a bit of fine tuning. So if the public sector is complaining that they can't get any more people, then of course you can reduce this a bit. Okay, so we're not claiming that we get the wages right in nominal terms directly, but it will take some time to adjust to all those countries.
And it'll probably be something that the discussion is ongoing on, right? I can imagine like constant debate about where that level of wages should be. Probably the right and the left constantly fighting on it, which would be much better still than what we have now.
Well, we have a minimum wage, for example, in Germany, and there's a minimum wage commission. And there's people from the employers' associations, there's people from the unions. I think there's also some economists on this commission. So it would be a nice idea to have this commission look at the job guarantee wage maybe once a year. Okay, and then you have a debate. So what's going on? So you have this political debate, and then you have this commission. And if you don't like the outcome, you can vote for other parties, and then the parties can send other people into that commission. Okay, so in that sense, you're not constantly discussing, bickering about 10 cents here or 20 cents there. But then you have a fixed date, and you basically say every June the 1st, we adjust the job guarantee wage. We also look at the inflation target. So if inflation is too low, you can say, okay, maybe the job guarantee wage should be a little bit higher because we are not reaching our inflation target. So macroeconomic concerns could enter this kind of debate as well. So that's what I would propose. And again, if you're using this kind of committee, you take it away from this kind of daily discussion thing. Mm-hmm. So it will have its fixed place in politics then.
I like it because if you make the job guarantee Eurozone wide, it sounds to me like everyone will have to come up to the level of the nation that has the highest bottom rung for social security. By social security, I don't mean as the Americans understand it. I mean what defines security in that society. So it literally will lift all boats.
Yes.
Not literally, obviously, there are no boats involved. it will lift all boats, rather than the way a lot of these dynamics work in economics is workers' pay and conditions get competed down all the time, don't they? To the lowest we can possibly put it. So I think that's a real strength of it.
Can I interrupt you for a second here? Because if you look at Spain, for example, they're now pushing for some kind of basic income. But the problem is that Spain has no social security payments. Okay, so in Spain you get unemployment benefits for a year. That's it. Okay,
really?
It's about 400 euros for a year. That's it. Then you go back to your parents, because it's a Catholic country. So if you have a job guarantee, it basically says if you're not employed, why not go into this job guarantee thing? Because it gives you permanent employment and permanent income. So this is exactly what you're talking about. Spain would go from a very low level to basically creating a social system which is more like the generous social system that we have, for example, in Germany. So that's one of the main reasons to basically do this job guarantee thing. Because otherwise we will have, again, unemployment where we don't want it, because the countries like Italy and Spain, their social security systems are lacking, especially in Spain. And that, of course, would... I mean, if in Spain you would have millions of unemployed people for another lost decade or something, and I think the Eurozone will be dead as a political project, because the people will not be happy with it. Again, coming back to John Maynard Keynes, the important thing is that people are participating in society and have their share. That's the important thing. That is what's basically destroying societies. This kind of fascism that we see rising, it's not the result of inflation or of basically socialization of investment or people depending on welfare or stuff like this. No, it's just people are not happy with the unemployment situation. And they, in Hungary, for example, there was lots of debt also, housing-related debt. So it's these things that are driving also the political dimension of this. So for the Eurozone not to break apart, it's very important now that we keep unemployment down, not like in the last crisis. After the great financial crisis, it was completely horrible. And if we repeat this again, there will be more countries going out of the European Union, for sure.
That's probably another strength of the proposal as well, that look, you can't have another decade. You probably can't have another 2 or 3 years of this without the whole thing, the whole European project collapsing.
So speaking of which, actually, there was, correct me if I'm wrong, Dirk, but I think there was some discussion in European Parliament about a job guarantee program, and to the point where I think something was put forward. But maybe I heard about this 3 years ago when we were at the European conference. But from what I know, it hasn't actually moved forward. Do you know why they haven't considered this as part of or have they considered this as part of the solution to the current crisis?
No, it's not part of the solution of the current crisis. So the Spanish government, again, is pushing for this idea of some kind of minimum income, which is hiding the fact that they don't have that kind of unemployment benefits that we have in other countries. No welfare. So also it's not UBI. It's not the universal basic income approach. It goes into this kind of direction, but it's more of an idea that unemployed people should get this minimum income. So they will not say it's universal. So it's more like basic income for those who need it. It's not a universal basic income. But I think that in the next couple of months, we will see more discussions of the job guarantee because we need quick solutions. There was already some proposal by Yanis Varoufakis about some kind of European unemployment reinsurance. So basically that the insurance system would be basically financially backed up by Brussels. But probably that is too complicated. And a job guarantee paid by Euro Treasury, it would be big, it would be easy to build. So I think it's a very good idea. So there's lots of talk about solidarity in Europe. And I think this is one of those proposals which would really do the job and get these people out of unemployment.
Yeah, it would be great if we had somebody like Yanis backing the concept of a job guarantee. I know that he had Stephanie Kelton on his TV show a few weeks ago, and I just wonder whether he's really grasped MMT as a way of looking at how money systems work, and therefore why a job guarantee is a no-brainer for stabilizing currency and also social cohesion. What's your take on, say, Yanis?
I think he's young enough to learn. So I think we share the same ideas. So, I mean, he cares a lot about the European people. We do the same thing. He thinks that probably the European Union project has failed by now and it's beyond repair. I'm not so sure, because the European Union is always driven by the politicians from the nation states. And if they are neoliberal, then, of course, the European Union will look very neoliberal. And it has ingrained in its ideas, of course, You have these 4 freedoms also here of movement, capital, labor, and goods, and services, and financial flows, money. I mean, the European Union needs to be reformed. We need to go forward, because I think that would be the more logical step. I mean, the other idea would be to go back to national currencies and just get out of the European Union and start from the national perspective. But I think it's not a good idea, because it creates a lot of political trouble. Plus, when the common market is gone, first of all, Germany will have 20-30% unemployment if we go back to national currencies. Plus, the people in the periphery of Europe will not get their cheap German goods. Okay, so it's a lose-lose situation. So I think it's easier to deal with the European economy and the structural problems by staying inside the euro and changing the rules. I think that's better. We have now a lot of industry located in Germany. And if we go back to national currencies, these companies would go bankrupt. And those machines would have to go back to Spain and Italy and other countries. And it would take a lot of time. It would take a lot of money, effort. And in the meantime, we would have a big fall in GDP, because the periphery cannot afford to buy those German goods and services. And the Germans don't know where to sell them else. But of course, if the European Union is not reformable, then of course we could try to think about something else and talk about also a peaceful dissolution of the euro. But I think it's too early. I think there's a lot of good signs that we have seen in the last couple of months in the Eurozone. If you want, I can tell you a little bit about it.
Yeah, I think I heard you have an interesting conversation on Twitter about this, actually. There was skepticism from one side and positivity from your end, perhaps. It was mostly about the recent measures about coronavirus and how the ECB had offered to buy an unlimited quantity of bonds, if I'm not mistaken, from European countries, which effectively would mean that they are free to spend whatever they want. Can you explain it?
Yes, please.
Well, I think you already said what needs to be said, but I'm going to go into the details. So, yeah, of course, the big scare is now that we repeat a euro crisis. So in Greece in 2010, the yields of government bonds went up. Bond prices went down. That, of course, meant that if they wanted to spend more, they would have to pay more in terms of interest rates on their government bonds. At some point, the investors, the banks, would not buy government bonds from Greece anymore. And then, of course, they couldn't pay. There was this private sector involvement. And then 3/4 of the debt was written off, basically, in this private sector involvement, if I'm not mistaken. So, of course, then they imposed austerity and GDP collapsed. And they lowered wages by 20% from public employees. And in the private sector, they did the same. So it was really horrible. And a lot of people thought that maybe this time around they will do it again. Okay, so the European Commission will basically say, okay, public deficits will spiral out of control. Let's create the Troika. Where's the Eurogroup when we need it? And they just go at it again, cutting government spending and these kind of things. But the first sign that this was not going to happen, so by now I would say it's pretty clear that austerity policy will not happen in the Eurozone. Okay, so maybe it's because I'm based in Berlin and I hear what people are saying in Berlin. But I mean, Germany is behind the European Union. Mrs. von der Leyen is from Germany, and Angela Merkel is still the head of the German government. And the Christian Democrats, they have been very, very silent. They don't talk about austerity. So what did the European Commission do? The European Commission said there's this general escape clause in the Stability and Growth Pact, and we want to activate that. And when it's activated, it means that the national governments can have deficits at 4, 5, 6%, 10 or 20%, but they will not be punished. And the European Council, which is basically the finance ministers and also the heads of state, they basically said, yeah, okay, we activate the general escape clause. So whatever deficit you have at the end of 2020, it's not going to be excessive. So you will not be punished. No austerity. Okay, so the national governments thought, okay, that's good. But we still have this problem that we want to sell government bonds to the banks, and they might say, maybe there's no market for that, so I don't want to buy them. And then the ECB said, look, we create this pandemic emergency purchase program called PEP. We spend 750 billion euros on government bonds and other financial assets. And we try to push the yields down. We want to keep those yields down. We don't want spreads. We don't want to see that. And we do this as long as we have to. And we do this spending as much money as we have to spend. And this week they said we will do it until 2022, I think. So reinvesting some of the stuff that they have spent now. And also they increased the size of the program by, I think, another 600 billion euros. Okay, and this, of course, means that if Italy goes to the banks and says, okay, I want to sell government bonds to the bankers all know that they can just turn around and sell those bonds to the ECB. Okay, so for them, it's risk-free. Okay, they buy Italian government bonds because even if they go bankrupt, they don't care because they can always go to the ECB and unload those bonds there. And that means, again, that effectively all the Eurozone governments can spend as much money as they want right now, which is an odd situation because even inside the MMT community, we never thought that the euro could be reformed in a way that you had basically nothing that would stop you from spending. I called for this PEP program. So in my book, I call for the ECB to back up all those government bonds that are issued by national governments. So I do this since 2014. I'm saying you need to do this. You are the dealer of last resort for government bonds, and you basically fix the solvency issue for good if you do this. But I overlooked the fact that this is the general escape clause in the Stability and Growth Pact, which was inserted in, I think, was a six-pack in, 2012 or something. But I'm not a legal expert, so I didn't notice that this happened. Now that they did it, of course, everybody's surprised. But yes, now it's like everybody has a sovereign currency and you can spend whatever you want and you're not going to go bankrupt. The problem, of course, is that this is not forever. They basically say the PEP program is until the crisis is over. But it's the ECB's call. If the ECB says we want to continue this indefinitely, well, they can do that. And I think they will have to. Okay, so the PEP program, I think it's not possible to remove it. If you remove it and the European Central Bank would be selling hundreds of billions of Italian government bonds into the markets would get scared and they wouldn't want to buy. So prices would collapse and you would create a huge financial crisis in Italy. So that's not going to happen. So the ECB has no mandate to create a financial crisis in Italy. And the other thing, the Stability and Growth Pact, well, I mean, once the economies are running much better, like before the crisis, you will be back to deficits like before the crisis of maybe 2%, maybe 1%, maybe even a surplus. So there's no problem with the Maastricht rules once you are back to normal. And that is why I think that we will not beat the euro crisis this time around, also because there's nobody to punish. Okay, it was a stupid virus. Even the DFG modelers in the German central bank, they know what an exogenous shock is. Okay, it's not your fault. It's an exogenous shock. So why should you be punished? And this is why this time around, from my German perspective, I'm very sure that no austerity is going to happen here in the Eurozone, because also people have understood that what Britain did to the European Union, if Spain is doing the same thing, and if Italy is leaving as well, then of course this cannot be reversed. The European Union then will be dying, and it will be a question of how much time is left, not a question of will it finally die or not. It's already on a downward trajectory, so policymakers understand that, of all the big parties and all the small ones as well. So I think history will not repeat itself this time. Yeah, that's, of course, my optimistic view. I hope that I'm right, but of course I fear that I'm wrong. I mean, that's normal. I cannot claim that I know what the future will bring.
Politics is unpredictable, isn't it?
To some extent, yes.
Yeah. So in your explanation, you mentioned a couple of terms that maybe is worth clarifying. Yield means interest rates paid on bonds?
It's basically the return to capital invested. So, for example, if you buy a government bond, it pays an interest rate of 2%. You buy it for 100 and it pays out 102. Then the interest rate on the government bond is 2%, and your yield, your return to your investment of 100 is also 2% because you get 102. But by now, because of zero interest rate policies, a government bond that would pay out 102 at the end of the year, you would buy it in the market for 102. So then you pay 102 and you get 102 at the end of the year, and then your yield is zero, even though the government bond has a 2% interest coupon. That's the difference. So basically the yield, it includes the market price. The interest rate doesn't. So the governments only pay the interest rate. They don't care whether the price of the government bond is up or down, because that's of no concern. They only care about the interest rate that they pay. It's a little bit like in the stock market. So Google, for example, they don't care about their share value. Well, the managers do, but not Google as such. They only care about the financing conditions, so how much of an interest rate they would pay if they issue more stocks. It's like this.
Okay. And the other term was the spread. And the spread, let me give it a go, is the difference between the yield on Germany's bonds and the yield on another country's bonds. Am I right?
Exactly. That's it.
Your paper has a section called Labour Mobility and Economic Integration. It starts by saying, today, labour mobility in the Eurozone happens under duress. Could you say more about that?
Yeah, we have a lot of countries in the Eurozone where, for example, youth unemployment is sky high, maybe 30%, maybe even more. I think in Greece at some point it was 50%. So labor mobility under conditions of mass unemployment, that's basically people being forced to leave their communities to find work. And that's not what we want. Okay, so if you can find a better job elsewhere, that's completely fine. This kind of labor mobility is something which is valuable. Okay, so we should have institutions that allow people to move around for whatever reason. Finding better jobs is one of them. But it would not be a good idea to move millions of Italians from the south of Italy, for example, to Finland. Okay, so we think that this is not what the economic landscape should look like. Okay, so in theory, you can either make the people go to the jobs or you can bring the jobs to the people. There's not much of a difference in a way because it's all about firm location. If you are the government and you say, basically, I don't want to end up with an industrial structure where, for example, everything is produced in Munich, okay, in Germany. So all the people from the south of Germany go to Munich, they move to Munich, that's where all the jobs are. That's not a good idea. I mean, the people there will be under stressful conditions. The public transport will feel the strain of these people. In Berlin, for example, we have gained 500,000 people over the last 10 years, and it really shows. So it's a much better idea to have a decentralized economy. Most of us have some kind of federal system. So basically, you want to ensure, and this is one of the main ideas also of the European Union, convergence and coherence. So basically that the same level of living is possible, or the living conditions are the same everywhere. So you're not forced to move to some kind of city because you want to live a better life with more nicer things. So the nicer things should be spread out evenly over the continent. That should be what the European Union is about, basically bringing the economy to the people and not, again, bringing the migrants to the jobs.
To the economy.
To the economy. So again, the economy is supposed to work for us. We're not supposed to run and work for the economy in the sense of moving where the jobs are. That's not a good idea.
I like that.
And then another thing, quoting from the paper again, what we wish to stress is that while monetary unemployment due to deficient aggregate demand and Keynesian liquidity preference constraints exists, there is also a type of monetary unemployment that is due to the nature of the monetary system. Now, that last part, the unemployment due to the nature of the monetary system, is what MMT is all about. But I was intrigued, just before you get to that, can you tell us what the term Keynesian liquidity preference means?
I can. So liquidity preference means that in times of economic distress, you prefer to have a liquid portfolio. Okay, so think about somebody who's a portfolio investor. Okay, so you have very liquid stuff, money and money-like stuff like cash and government bonds, which you can always sell in the market, which is very deep. Price will not collapse if you sell even a lot of it. And then you have more illiquid things like real estate, shares, private sector bonds, maybe other sums that you lend to some private people, these kind of things. So when crisis comes, most of the people try to adjust their portfolio and then basically try to make it more liquid. But that can work. Okay, so of course, if people are trying to sell real estate, sell illiquid assets, and they all want to buy liquid assets like money and bonds, the amount of bonds will not be increasing because there's an increase in demand. Liquidity preference means that probably asset prices collapse in times of economic crisis because people are basically scared. There's a lot of uncertainty. Again, a Keynesian topic. They think, okay, if I have money, I cannot lose. I don't have an interest, but I cannot lose. So that's what I want. So John Maynard Keynes, in his general theory, he wrote at some point that the liquidity preference is not actually the driver of the crisis, but more like a symptom of the crisis. Okay, so he says, once it's clear that we have an economic crisis, people will basically move from illiquid assets to liquid assets. This is the liquidity preference. But he says the drop in investment is probably the driving force of the recession or the depression. So I think that Pavlina wrote that. I'm not such a big fan of the liquidity preference idea, but I acknowledge that it exists. And of course, the collapse in asset prices then leads to another decrease in the amount of investment, because if real estate prices collapse, then of course the real estate projects that you had planned for 2021 will not happen. So there is some validity to the idea that the liquidity preference plays a role. But as John Maynard Keynes stressed himself in his general theory, it's more like an afterthought to the crisis. But the collapse in investment is the main driver of the crisis.
And then there's this passage, speaking of Keynesianism, employment is not guaranteed through conventional aggregate demand measures. And then it goes on to say, indeed, we have observed periods of robust growth that still experience joblessness. How does jobless growth and jobless so-called recoveries, how do they happen?
I think that this has something to do also with the amount of working time. So if there's increasing demand for labor, and then you have a lot of overtime, then the firms will basically say, we'll just work our workers harder, maybe even unpaid overtime, and they will not hire other people. There might also be outsourcing and offshoring, these kind of things, trying to also use machines to get rid of workers. So with aggregate demand policies, it's a very rough instrument. So, of course, if you increase government spending, there will be more jobs at some point. But you don't know how much bang you will get for the buck. And that is why with the job guarantee, you make sure that you really go to full employment. Okay, so there will still be people who are unemployed because you're not forced to work. Okay, so if you are unemployed, for example, because you're between jobs, so you already signed another labor contract, a work contract, and you don't want to work in between, then of course you're not forced into the job guarantee scheme. And that is why we don't want to go to unemployment zero, but we want to go to full employment in the terms that whoever wants to work and has no work can get a job from the government. That's the idea. And that's where basically it's better than aggregate demand management, because that might be erring on the one side or the other.
So over here, we have a job guarantee proposal from the TUC.
Yeah.
I think they put it out at the beginning of May. Did you have a chance to look at it?
Yeah, I looked at it.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, it's very promising. I mean, they basically say we want to have a job guarantee. I think it's for 6 months only. And it's for those people who are longer unemployed, those who are below 25 and, I don't know, above some other age. So it's basically targeting the vulnerable. And I think it's a good start. So I was amazed to see this. I think this looks like a very promising thing. I'm glad that the British unions are coming around to this kind of idea.
Was there any influence from your end or Pavlina's maybe? We like to think there was, but...
Because there is a section in there about centrally funded, locally administered, which, you know...
It resonates, yeah.
It always makes MMTers go, oh, wait, I've heard that somewhere before.
No, I think that probably the link might be Robert Skidelsky. I met him last year in London at the conference of the International Institute for Monetary Research. He was there as a keynote speaker, and he also was in favor of the job guarantee. So he said, we need a job guarantee. It was in Westminster at the British Automobile Club. Lots of people in attendance there were not probably friends of workers, but they were engaging with this kind of idea and thought, okay, yeah, maybe there is a point. So Robert Skidelsky is pushing for this job guarantee thing for quite some time. I think he also wrote a paper for a union or for some kind of think tank on the job guarantee.
I think he wrote a paper on achieving the 4-day week, and the job guarantee was one of the kind of proposals included in that.
Yes, that was it. Yes, thank you.
And I think he wrote that with Nathan Tankus as well, I think
he was in conversations with Nathan before writing that paper. So I don't know if Nathan's name actually appeared on the paper.
Oh, fair enough.
Robert probably plays a big role in bringing these ideas to the policymakers there.
Oh, it's good to know the origin story of that. And also, it doesn't get talked about enough, I think, in job guarantee advocacy, that a lot of people go, look, jobs should be a thing of the past, robots, blah, blah, blah. Surely it's only going to end up being make work. And you go, okay, all right, well, if you think we should be working a 3-day week or a 4-day week, have the job guarantee job be a 3 or 4 day week job. You know, the rest of the economy has to sort of snap in line with that. But my thing with the TUC job guarantee is, because you have to be unemployed for 3 months or 6 months to qualify for the guaranteed job, it's kind of saying it's not a job guarantee as we understand it. It locks in unemployment. For it to exist, people have got to have been unemployed for those long periods of time. So I worry that once it's implemented, the unemployed people that exist at that time will be stigmatized in that people will be able to say, look, we've got a job guarantee in place now and you still can't find a job. You know, I worry about what that's going to do for the culture, if you know what I mean.
I don't know why that came in, to be honest, because to me, what the kind of idea behind, wait 6 months is like the market takes priority, right? If the market doesn't want you for 6 months, then you can have a job elsewhere. And I think that's kind of the wrong way to look at it. I wonder where that influence come from.
I think it's just a political thing. So also in Austria, they had this kind of idea of a job guarantee for basically long-term unemployed people, also here in Berlin. So basically with the job guarantee costs money, and in practice, it's not going to be federally funded. Okay, so they basically say, okay, how much money do we have? How many people can we reach? We start with the most vulnerable first, and that's how it's implemented. So it's kind of logical that in politics, you go step by step. You don't start with the full thing, because otherwise you would have the federal government having to jump in there and making all these payments to those people who get the money from the job guarantee scheme. So I think it's just because in politics, you go slowly, you move step by step. This is why they introduce it like this. This is why they roll it out like that. If we would have a big crisis, so for example, in the US now, they have huge unemployment, like I don't know, almost 30 million people. I mean, for them, that would be a great idea for the US to roll out the job guarantee at the federal level, because you have mass unemployment in the United States. Whereas in Germany, the unemployment rate has ticked upwards just a little bit. Okay, so there's no need, or most people from the political side, there's no, for them, unemployment is not the main issue. But in the US, it is the main issue. And that's where you would basically see the federal government saying, oh, that's a great idea, because the elections are not far away. So it would be ironic, but it's not impossible that Donald Trump would be the person rolling out the job guarantee.
Oh, God.
Oh, yeah, that's...
God forbid.
That would be horrible. You would basically say, oh
no. Everybody in the army. That's system.
Yeah, but this is, I mean, the job guarantee thing. It's, I mean, the workers would like it, and the problem, of course, is that the job guarantee it would exist also during Republican presidents in the US. So we have to be aware that whatever we suggest, it will have to survive also in times where conservative parties or other parties are in power that are maybe opposed to these kind of ideas that the state should play a more active role. So, yeah, I mean, Boris Johnson was the first one in the United Kingdom to basically say the Bank of England can do monetary financing for the government. Nobody saw that coming. But I think because they are conservatives, they can do more things than maybe progressive people can when they are in power, because everybody will scream hyperinflation at them, but the fiscal hawks will not scream hyperinflation at Boris Johnson because he's part of their gang. So that's politics. It's sometimes very confusing what politicians can get away with from different brands. In Germany, for example, the last time we had a red-green government, they made the labor market more flexible. They liberalized the financial sector, and they cut unemployment insurance. The unions would have been up in arms if that would have been the conservative government. Yeah. They couldn't have done it, but the progressive parties did it. So politics is always complicated, and economics is easy. So I always tell that to my students, that I'm just talking about stuff here, but I don't want to be the benevolent dictator. It's a democracy, and we should educate people, and they should understand why these things are important. Otherwise, it won't work.
I think that was the problem. When Trump came in 2016, about a month into it, I was still thinking, all right, maybe one thing that will happen is he will have to make the jobs come back. He will have to do something to turn around the economy. Let's presume he's vain enough to want to be able to come out of it saying, I totally transformed America in real terms. And of course, what we didn't factor in was that what actually happens is if he tweets, the economy's better than ever, that's it. You know, the people that he's tweeting at believe it.
Everybody thinks
it doesn't matter. They could be starving to death and they could be reading that tweet. And, you know, we just didn't realize the power of just basic lying. Mm-hmm. that was going to take over the world.
I mean, there was this South Park series where they basically said that Donald Trump was getting into this fight with, I think he was in this show, The Apprentice, and I think he was not paid as much as some other celebrity. So he said, I want to be paid as well as the other celebrity because I could be president of the United States. And I think it was all a joke. It started as a joke. That's the way the South Park creators displayed it. And that's the way I heard from other people that probably this is how it started. That guy is not seriously a president. He doesn't want to be a politician. He wants to be a powerful person. He's not even interested in democracy and the political process. He just doesn't care.
He just wants a pay rise.
Yeah, so it's, I mean, this is also what you get when you look at the democratic system of the US. You have two political parties. And to be honest, the other persons on the Republican side, I mean, if you look at Mike Pence and these people who were on the ballot, they're also crazy. In Germany, these would be far-right extremist Christians, which would be unelectable here in Germany. These would be the alternatives to Donald Trump. That's amazing. So I think from the political side, it would be better for the United States if you would have more parties, more political parties, so that people can press their preferences more easily. Now it's like, do you want Trump or do you want Biden? And Trump basically says shoot black people, and Biden says shoot black people in the legs. That's horrible. I'm really hurting for the American people.
The thing is, the only way, like, I don't think people will vote for Biden as much as they will just vote against Trump. Let's hope that's enough,
Yeah.
Which is why I think it's really important to always drill into the macro side of the job guarantee and of money as a system, because, like you say, it needs to be there when there are people on the left side of the spectrum and on the right side of the spectrum in charge. It needs to be understood by both sides, and like you say, ironically, we have this. It's basically Nixon going to China in reverse on the left. The so-called left, the nominal left, get into a position of power. They're off invading other countries and cutting public services just to show they're good game players, basically.
I mean, politics is basically about what the people are thinking, and if we can get to those people who are interested in money, and we basically tell them how it works, then they will not make these political mistakes and vote for people who promise one thing and then do a completely different thing. And that's my hope, that basically MMT gets through to communicate. And I really like what you are doing here with your podcast. That's brilliant. I mean, this is how you change the politicians, because the politicians are not in there to educate the public about money. Okay, it's not the task of the German finance minister basically to basically describe to people why a black zero is not a good idea. I mean, the guy is a politician. Okay, he wants to go somewhere. He wants to maximize voters. That's not his task. I'm not saying that he's not trying to make people understand how government spending works in Germany. So he's trying to do this to create some transparency. But we have to understand that the politicians are basically, they are trying to maximize votes. And that is why it's so important to reach out to the communities and to deliver these ideas like the job guarantee, to make sure that they understand that they're not unemployed because they are not productive or somehow lazy or some other stupid thing, but it's because there's a lack of jobs. And these kind of things are so important. Basically, that's 90% of what's driving it. I think John Maynard Keynes, in his general theory, the last sentence in his general theory is the sentence about that in the long run, it's about ideas which will influence our world for good or for bad, not vested interests. It takes a lot of time until this happens, but that's our hope for returning to a civilized world, or more civilized world.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it, Dirk. Before we go, to just say we'll link to your paper in the show notes of this. It's a really great read, actually. And
exactly. And you were one of the main organizers for the European MMT conference, weren't you?
Yeah, that would have happened. The second one was scheduled for mid-June, basically. But because of the coronavirus, we canceled it in March. It was pretty much clear that it's not going to happen. But we'll do it next year. To bring it back to Europe and talk about all of those things. So, of course, because of coronavirus thing is like a fast-forward button, which nature has given us. Okay, so all this climate change, for example, it's also now in the conscience of the public. So everybody thinks about ecological stuff. Everybody understands that the mass unemployment that is going to happen also in Southern Europe, it's not going to be the fault of the Southern Europeans, also in the US. So everybody knows that basically the economy is something which we need to deal with. So I think this neoliberal idea that basically you just let markets do whatever they do best, that's over with. I mean, everybody sees there's a climate change. It's not going to be stopped by more incentives.
Almost everybody. Almost everybody.
Yeah, but I think the consensus is already there. So I think we see a new world coming up, and that is, again, that also should give us hope that this will be built on hopefully on other ideas.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, look, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you very much.
I hope to talk to you again before too long, Dirk. Thanks, Patricia, and thanks, Dirk.
Yeah, that was great.
Look forward to talking to you all again soon. Okay, thanks a lot. Bye.
Thanks, Patricia. Thanks, Christian. Bye-bye.
That was the MMT Podcast with Patricia Pino and Christian Riley. Don't forget, you can support the show through Patreon starting at $1 a month and get early access to all our episodes and patron-only episodes. You can do that by going to patreon.com/MMT Podcast. You can also find me on Twitter at MMT Podcast, and you can find Patricia on Twitter at Patricia N. Pino. And you can email us at mmtpodcast@outlook.com. Editing and post-production was by Damien Caldwell. Thanks for listening.